Remmick is the centuries-old Irish vampire whose hunger goes far beyond his lust for blood. It's never explicitly stated how old Remmick is, and vampires tend to keep that information on the down low, even more than people in their 30s and 40s, but there are clues hidden throughout the film and other canon material that we can use to learn more about his past.
Long ago, the man who stole my father's land forced these words upon us. I hated those men, but the words still bring me comfort.
This line implies Remmick is from pre-colonial Ireland, placing his origins in one of two major turning points in Irish history, the 400s or the 1500s. Long ago, Ireland followed a pagan Celtic belief system where they worshipped a wide array of deities in natural shrines. That shifted in 432 CE when Christian missionaries arrived and slowly replaced the old traditions. Christianity snaked its way in, much like it does in pretty much all of my horror lore videos, including this one apparently. So the old beliefs were pushed aside and a new religious identity was imposed across the island. But I personally think the details Remmick gives us point to a later, much harsher chapter. In the 1500s, King Henry VIII broke away from the Catholic Church in Rome and created the Church of England, causing Ireland to become the target of a violent religious overhaul. Under Henry's daughter, Elizabeth I, the English crown began seizing Irish land, replacing Irish families with English and Scottish settlers, and forcing their Protestant beliefs onto the population. Which is probably what Remmick means by forced those words upon us. It's likely Remmick lived through a time when the Irish fought to hold on to pieces of their culture. The choreography of the vampire's dance in Sinners lines up with this idea. Choreographer Akaman Hassani Jones confirmed that the movements are based on 1500s Irish dancing.
I'm really excited, you know, who gets to work on 16th century Irish cultural dance.
Another clue can be found in the gold Remmick offers to those he's trying to manipulate.
It's from a different place and a different time, but it spins just the same.
While the exact origin of the coins isn't stated, their ancient appearance suggests that they're centuries old, maybe even predating Remmick himself. If so, the gold may be stolen, taken from someone or somewhere else, and following a pattern seen throughout Remmick's story of him taking something that never belonged to him and repurposing it to serve his own needs. We also see him wearing a wedding ring, but we don't know if Remmick, human or vampire, ever actually had a wife. By the 1500s, it was becoming more common for European men, including those in Ireland, to wear simple gold bands on their left hand as a sign of marriage. It wasn't universal, but it was practiced among certain Christian communities after the Reformation. While the ring could be proof that he was married, I think it's more likely to be just another part of his human mask, a manipulation tactic to create connections with others and a shortcut to gaining trust and sympathy.
They took my wife. Oh my God. I'm a coward, ain't I?
Ironically, wedding rings are still used as a manipulation tactic on TikTok, where apparently girls are more likely to hit on dudes with wedding rings, so maybe that's what Remmick was after. To the girls that do this, and the guys who bait them, at some point, the man Remmick once was turned into a vampire. A man who had likely spent his mortal life watching his people lose their land and lose their faith, fighting to hold on to whatever fragments of identity he could, was suddenly stripped of the thing that he had left, his humanity. But as one life ended, another began, and Remmick eventually turned his sights to new lands. If you want to better understand the tragic roots of Remmick, the cultural parallels Sinners draws between Irish and African American communities, and the hidden lore buried in the film's official Spotify page, then stick around to the end of this video. Let me invite you into this episode of Horror History. Remmick is the main antagonist of Ryan Coogler's 2025 vampire action horror movie, Sinners. According to Coogler, Sinners was a chance to achieve a long-held dream to make his mark on the horror genre.
My earliest memories are of movies and the power of them are sitting in a room full of strangers, dark, and being absolutely terrified by something that's happening on the screen. All of my favorite filmmakers, they left a dent on in that genre somehow. I couldn't wait to do one day.
I think he actually pulled it off. One of Coogler's inspirations behind the villainous vampire came from the 2001 film The Luck of the Irish. No, that's not a joke. During a Sinners panel at Deadline Contenders Film, Coogler said, "That was our first introduction to some of the similarities in Irish folk music to basically our music. There was a small Irish community in the Bay and we would talk about it. The movie was kind of a touch point for us to jump off of, crazy enough. We've been fascinated with that culture in my family." By grounding Remmick in Irish folklore, Coogler was also paying respect to the seminal influence in modern vampires, Bram Stoker. Stoker blended pieces of European and Irish folklore in his own vampire, Dracula. And while Dracula may take place in Romania and England, you see Irish DNA in the story's themes of invasion and a foreign force draining people of their life. I'm finding more and more that when it comes to vampire lore, all roads lead to Dracula, whether it's Remmick paying homage to Bram Stoker's Irish roots, Nosferatu being a copyright-safe version of Dracula, or Count Chocula being a version of Dracula who loves chocolatey cereal. Comment if you want the Count Chocula horror history, even though I already know the answer is yes. Sinners wants you to discover who Remmick is gradually, not be told everything outright. He's someone whose identity has been fractured and reshaped across centuries, much like the histories of colonized peoples whose stories were suppressed or rewritten by others. Colonization often destroys records and traditions, and real experiences are replaced with the colonizer's version of history. Remmick's past is hard to piece together, as it's scattered across centuries and hidden in the shadows. So to fully sink our teeth into Remmick's story, we need to take it back to when he first set sail for America. In 1911, Remmick left his homeland due to mounting unrest. Ireland was under strain politically, socially, and economically. Decades of British rule had pushed tensions to a breaking point, so Irish nationalists were demanding home rule, the right to govern themselves. And here I thought home rule was the rule that said the catcher has to have the ball to block home plate.
It is a collision at the plate!
In response, the British military presence increased, while the Royal Irish Constabulary cracked down harder than ever to maintain control. Meanwhile, everyday life was becoming harder for the average Irish family. Rural communities, which made up most of the population, were struggling. Farms weren't producing enough food, job opportunities were scarce, and the country's economy had been stagnant for years. All of this pressure created one of the largest waves of emigration in Ireland's history. Between the late 1800s and the early 1900s, hundreds of thousands of Irish men and women crossed the Atlantic in search of something better. World War I was still 3 years away, but the threat of war loomed over daily life, another shadow creeping across a country already exhausted by decades of turmoil. So Remmick did what many others were doing. He boarded the Celtic Hare, a ship carrying Irish immigrants to America. We don't know the exact date he set sail, but considering he arrived in America on July 31st, and steamships typically took 7 to 9 days to cross the Atlantic, we can assume that he left Ireland around July 24th, 1911, which is good enough for me to put one of those things. Looks pretty good. At some point during the journey, Remmick attacked and turned the entire crew and its passengers, leaving behind destroyed cabins and blood-soaked floors. As the Celtic Hare approached shore on the night of July 31st, his newly turned vampire clan celebrated with music. But when the sun rose, the vampires were destroyed, leaving nothing but burnt remnants. As the ship docked at Boston Harbor, Remmick fled the scene with his skin smoking from the sun, which was witnessed by a local woman. We later see that sunlight takes longer to destroy Remmick than the other vampires, possibly because of how ancient he truly is. I mentioned earlier that Coogler considers Sinners to be a shout out to Bram Stoker, so I find it interesting that this is basically the story of Dracula's journey aboard the Demeter. The Count leaves his homeland in search of a new life in England, mirroring Remmick leaving his homeland for a new life in America. Then, during the journey, Dracula attacks and turns most of the ship's crew, who are later destroyed by sunlight, just as Remmick did. When the Demeter drifted into Whitby Harbor, it was found empty, except for the captain tied to the helm, and Dracula was witnessed fleeing ashore in the form of a black dog. No one knows what Remmick did in the 21 years between stepping off the Celtic Hare and resurfacing in 1932. All we know for certain is that his journey took him from Boston to Mississippi, which seems like a strange move, but was actually a common thing back then, because Mississippi could give them the farming lifestyle that they were used to in Ireland, which couldn't be found in big cities like Boston. So many Irish settlers came to Mississippi via the old Three Chop Trail, a Choctaw trail marked by 3 tomahawk chops in trees all along the way. In 1932, Remmick crossed paths with the Choctaw Tribe. Historically, the Choctaw Nation and the Irish share a bond that originated in the Great Famine of the 1840s. Still grieving from their own Trail of Tears, a forced migration of roughly 60,000 Native Americans from their ancestral home, the Choctaw donated $170, which would be around $5,000 in 2026, to aid starving Irish families. It was an act of solidarity between two oppressed peoples, which is still commemorated in Ireland today. It seems Remmick tried to take advantage of that hospitality. Remmick usually gains access to places and people by presenting himself as a victim or as a non-threatening person. Given the historic bond between the Irish and the Choctaw, it's possible he used that shared narrative to gain their trust. Whatever occurred didn't end well. The Choctaw recognized what Remmick truly was.
He's not what he seems. God forbid you let him into your home.
And whatever Remmick did after being granted their trust was horrific enough that they chased him out, hunting him down for miles.
Ain't no engines around here for miles.
Beaten and burning in the sun, Remmick eventually finds potential protection when he comes across the home of 2 clan members, Joan and Bert. And that brings us to the first chronological event in Sinners. Remmick begs Joan and Bert for help, telling them that he's being pursued by Choctaw. He spots their clan robes and cleverly uses this to manipulate his way into their house, using their hatred to his advantage. He's able to read his victims, find out their weaknesses, and exploit them.
They took my wife. Oh, God. I'm a coward, ain't I?
This manufactures an instant emotional connection, positioning himself as a grieving husband in order to disarm them and make them look weak. Remmick also tells the couple that he has gold and uses it to barter his way in.
Them dirty engines meant to rob me. They ain't get all of it. Y'all can have it. don't let him hurt me no more.
As Joan keeps watch for the Choctaw, Remmick follows Bert further into the house where he attacks and turns him. I pointed out the crib in the background of this room in my Smoke and Stack episode, a detail never mentioned in the film, but it still shows his ruthlessness. Remmick chose to kill Bert and Joan in the presence of their child, or possibly alongside their child, which fits in with Remmick's pattern of attack. Killing Bert and his wife was not enough. He's destroying his family and his legacy. In the dark of the nursery, we can see Remmick's glowing eyes, a trait not found in Irish or European vampire folklore. The inspiration for the glowing eyes came to Coogler from the DreamWorks film Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. And no, that's not a joke either.
So I'll talk about influences on this movie.
Okay.
Right, on this movie right here, Sinners.
Okay.
That's a massive one.
Puss in Boots?
Yeah.
On Sinners?
Think about the villain.
Death.
Think about his defining feature.
Oh, the eyes.
Yes.
The vampire's eyes have the same quality some animals have, called tapetum lucidum. It's a reflective layer in the eyes of nocturnal animals, allowing them to see in low light, but also giving off that glowing appearance, a subtle explanation for the uncanny ability these creatures have to see in dark wooded areas. Coogler wanted the same effect for his vampires.
So he wanted to do this in the vampires, and I thought it would be really cool to do that practically with a contact lens.
But what happens next isn't about what Remmick sees, it's about what he hears. I suppose the reveal of Remmick being a vampire shouldn't have been too much of a surprise. I mean, the clues were there. The Choctaw wanted to leave before dark, and Remmick arrived at Bert and Joan's house with his skin literally smoking from the sunlight. But my favorite detail has to be the buzzards. When Remmick first arrives at the house, there's nothing in the sky, but when the Choctaw later arrive and Remmick is inside with Bert, we see buzzards now circling the house, and they later settle on the roof. In Western cultures and some Native American cultures, buzzards are often seen as harbingers or symbols of death and misfortune. The image of them circling above is often seen as a warning. Remmick senses a voice rising from a juke joint across town. The voice belongs to the preacher's son, Sammie, and carries the raw ache of the blues, singing about the music that he loves and the father who wants him to abandon it.
You're the one I came for. I sensed you.
Drawn to the music, Remmick makes his way to the juke joint with Bert and Joan in tow. Sammie's song, like most of the blues, is a form of rebellion against his father, who demands he embrace church music and leave the blues behind. And in that way, Sammie mirrors Remmick far more than either of them realize. Earlier, I mentioned how religion was forced onto Remmick's people, reshaping their beliefs and identity. Here, we see that same tension take a new shape.
Blues wasn't forced on us like that religion. No, sir. We brought this with us from home. It's magic what we do. It's sacred and big.
I already talked about the meaning of the blues in my Smoke and Stack video, but long story short, blues music is a musical expression of pain born from slavery. But Remmick no longer has that kind of rooted culture in his life. By the time he becomes a vampire and crosses the ocean, his own cultural grounding has been stripped away. So when he hears Sammie's song, it hits him on a deeper level. Sammie's music is authentic, and his performance creates a surreal scene where past and future are linked through the power of music. This is a literal representation of legends that exist throughout history and different cultures.
People born with the gift of making music so true, it can pierce the veil between life and death, conjuring spirits from the past and the future.
Holy crap, Lois, Pierce the Veil reference. The idea is taken literally in the movie, which I see as a visual representation of how music can be a vessel for history and culture in real life. Kind of like how Pierce the Veil always includes traditional Spanish melodies. But I can't talk about that here. Go to my other channel, Pumpkin Metal, if you want pop punk and metal band history episodes. The opening of Sinners even references how in medieval Ireland they had fillies, highly trained poets and scholars. And in West Africa they had griots, who were oral storytellers, poets, and musicians. Ever since he was turned into a vampire, Remmick has been severed from his people, cut off from the ancestry that once defined him.
The soul gets stuck in the body, can't rejoin the ancestors. Cursed to live here with all this hate.
Remmick believes that by turning Sammie into a vampire and assimilating his music, he can bridge the gap back to his people. But he doesn't understand the pain or the cultural weight behind Sammie's music. He just wants its power. Vampires have always reflected the cultural fears of the eras that birthed them. From post-war anxiety in the 1920s, to class disparity in the 1930s, to sexual liberation in the 1950s and 1970s, to disease in the 1990s. This is something that I like to call cultural legendizing, when a community's trauma transforms into myth, so societal fears can survive across generations. In Sinners, Remmick and his clan of vampires represent cultural appropriation and colonization. The blood Remmick feeds on represents their identities. He assimilates the victim's memories and skills when he turns them, which is what sets him apart from just another cinema vampire. Remmick leads the trio to the Juke joint, catching the attention of Cornbread, the club's bouncer. Remmick tells Cornbread that they heard that there was a party inside and casually adds that they're musicians themselves. And seeing as how they walked there, they're hungry as dogs. Technically, no lies were told, it's just a different type of hunger. As he's sent away, the Smokestack twins and a few others head to the entrance, and he sees Sammie among them.
Must be that voice I heard from out here. Oh, it was beautiful.
Remmick tells the twins that they're from North Carolina. That one could be a lie, but then again, it could also be a clue to where he was in the 21-year gap after arriving in America. When asked if they're members of the clan, Remmick acts offended, insisting that they believe in equality and music. And he's probably not lying here, because when Remmick turned Bert and Joan, their former beliefs and prejudices were stripped away. Once again, Remmick is able to read his intended victims and tries to manipulate them. Smoke and Stack are driven by profit, so he tempts them by saying that they come to spend money. And in an attempt to prove that they belong, the vampires perform a rendition of Pick Poor Robin Clean, one of the earliest blues songs ever recorded. The lyrics tell a story of hunger and survival, reflecting the time of severe economic hardship during the Great Depression. This is a song that Remmick has appropriated from black blues singers, which he now tries to use for his own gain, much as he hopes to do with Sammie's music upon gaining entry to the club. The Smokestack twins, hoping to protect their Juke joint from the cultural fusion of the outside world, turn Remmick away. Club Juke acts as a symbol of cultural segregation, so Cornbread, as the bouncer, decides who gets to partake in that culture. Meaning that Remmick and his vampires are literally and symbolically uninvited. Like traditional vampire lore, they can't come in unless welcomed. Remmick acts stunned that they're being refused, framing it as discrimination, and questions why Mary is allowed in the club.
She here, cause she family.
Family. Can't we just, for one night, just all be family?
From the moment he hears the word family, Remmick seizes it as a tool, but when Smoke reaches for his gun, the three vampires retreat and linger outside. Eventually, Mary approaches, sent by Stack to try to scope them out, and the trio breaks into an old Irish-Scottish folk song called Wild Mountain Time. While the version most people know was first recorded in 1957, its roots stretch back to an earlier Scottish ballad from 1949, The Braids of Balquhidder. The song is about a man inviting a young woman to join him in gathering wildflowers. Again, this foreshadows Mary joining his coven of vampires. The hypnotic melody almost acts like a lullaby, enticing Mary in. Mary tells them she's there to find out whether they're good people, and more importantly, whether they have money to spend.
Solid gold kind, darling. Yeah.
Because just as Remmick wants the power of Sammie's music for selfish reasons, the people inside the Juke joint will likely only let Remmick in if they can get something out of him. Everyone here is looking for leverage. And once again, Remmick zeroes in on his intended victim's weakness and weaponizes it.
But it's no good to you.
It's no good to her. Well, what makes you say that?
Cause you're in some deep, deep pain.
Mary admits she's grieving her mother, and Remmick immediately twists that vulnerability into an opportunity, claiming that he could have saved her mother from her fate, and he can still save Mary from hers. Unsettled, she corrects him, claiming she doesn't need saving.
Yes, you do. You all do.
His word choice here is interesting, because it makes me think of colonizers and religious authorities who forced religion on people, claiming they need saving. Remmick, now as a vampire, uses the same language his own oppressors used on him. When she notices his unnatural eyes, Mary arms herself, but before she can return to the safety of the Juke joint, Remmick jumps and attacks her. With Mary among his ranks, Remmick is able to infiltrate the club, leading to many others becoming corrupted.
We're gonna kill every last one of you.
While Mary gets to work inside, turning Stack into a vampire, Remmick attacks and turns the club's bouncer Cornbread. The group swells in number as he assimilates everyone who leaves the club in a panic after Mary's Stack attack. With black, white, Irish, Chinese, and American members, Remmick builds a clan of mixed races, genders, and cultures, reaffirming the analogy that Coogler is making between vampire covens and cultural assimilation, a complete absorption into another culture. The vampires also function as a hive mind. Everyone in his ranks is mentally connected. As a result, when Remmick turns someone, he gains their memories, their skills, and their language, like when he's suddenly able to speak Chinese after turning Bo Chang. Remmick represents Irish immigrants who arrived in America as an oppressed group. At first, they were seen by some as this kind of inferior group, stereotyped as violent drunks in political cartoons of the era. I honestly don't know if it would be considered offensive to laugh at this, so I'm not going to. But over the time span of generations, the Irish assimilated and are basically just seen as white. And now, everyone wears green on St. Patrick's Day, and kids eat Lucky Charms, and U2 is just on your Apple device whether you like it or not. Talk about forcing your culture on someone. As the survivors inside prepare for battle, Remmick and his growing number of vampires began to sing and dance outside. This time, it's the Rocky Road to Dublin, an Irish folk song first recorded in 1859. We know at this point that Remmick chooses the songs he sings carefully. Each one contains clues or foreshadowing of the vampire and his intentions. Only this time, it contains clues to the vampire's past. The song follows the journey of an Irishman from the Irish town of Thyme to Dublin to eventually the English city of Liverpool, and the ballad chronicles the hardships and violence he encounters along the way. And the lyrics do not do the Irish people any favors in dispelling the drunkard stereotype. The narrator leaves his hometown because he can't find any work, so he heads on to Dublin where he's robbed, and locals make fun of his heavy accent. Then he travels overseas, leaving his homeland behind in hopes of starting a new life in England. But when the narrator arrives in Liverpool, he is mocked for his Irish identity and rejected. The narrator loses his temper and gets into fights with the locals. Eventually, he finds fellow Galway men who join the fight and help him win. Like the song's narrator, Remmick left his homeland believing a new life awaited him overseas. And as I mentioned earlier, Irish immigrants were often met with hostility and discrimination upon arriving in America, much like the narrator's experience in England. So while we don't know exactly what Remmick did in the 21 years between his arrival and Sinners, it's not a huge stretch to assume that Remmick's experiences matches those of the narrator of the song, meaning he would have been welcomed with anger and violence. The narrator of The Rocky Road to Dublin is also a man who longs for home, who feels separated from his people in a hostile land, but eventually finds solidarity among those like him. Remmick's creation of a vampire family and his desire to reconnect with the ancestors he's been cut off from reflect that same ache for belonging. Another realization I had was that the actor who plays Remmick, Jack O'Connell, is a UK-born actor with an Irish background, and his father actually did migrate from Ireland to England like the narrator in the song. And he has stated that his role in Sinners was an opportunity to engage his childhood passion of traditional Irish dance and music. Irish folk songs and African-American blues songs come from different places, but they serve a similar purpose. They carry stories of grief, survival, and resistance when everything else is under attack. Irish folk music grew out of bardic traditions meant to preserve history through melody, while the blues emerged from the trauma of slavery and the continued oppression in the American South. But both traditions became cultural lifelines. And since blues later evolved into rock and roll, you just know that Dropkick Murphys fans were eating real good when Sinners came out. But still unable to reach everyone who's left without being invited in, Remmick approaches the group of survivors in the club and tells them that he is their only way out, that he can give them the sense of family that the Jim Crow era in America denies them. But the one he wants most is Sammie.
You're the one I came for. I sensed you. I want to see my people again. I'm trapped here, but your gifts can bring them to me.
Remmick makes the survivors an offer. They give him Sammie, and he lets them walk away with their lives. Smoke refuses to give up his cousin to the bloodthirsty vampire across the threshold, so Remmick reveals a little piece of information he got from Bert when he turned him, that their purchase of the club was actually just a trap. Hogwood, Bert's uncle who sold the mill to the twins, was actually the head of the local Ku Klux Klan, and the sale was a setup from the start. He planned to kill everyone inside, then literally rinse and repeat. Remmick may be a manipulative, blood-sucking vampire, but he and Smoke have a common enemy. They've both been the targets of racial hostility, so Remmick offers to take down Hogwood if they join forces.
Now that we got numbers, we'll probably go to that old bigot and rectify him, too.
Remmick is my favorite type of villain, the kind that thinks that they're in the right. Remmick is driven by the wounds of his past that never healed. He's not against the racist Hogwood because he opposes cruelty, he's against him because racism was once used against him. As the fanged foes move in on the Juke joint, Remmick and his clan begin to sing Pick Poor Robin Clean in unison, once again foreshadowing what they want to do to the survivors inside. But the singing is interrupted when Remmick hears someone shout an open invitation for them to come inside, thus beginning the final fight. Remmick runs at Annie, but she throws holy water on his face. Because of the hive mind connection, the whole pack can feel his pain. As kind of a side note, does anyone else find it interesting that hive minds are so prevalent in modern horror? Between this, Stranger Things, and Tilu, I have to wonder if this is another example of cultural legendizing. Given the similarities between the instant spread of information in these hive minds and the frightening speed of virality happening on the modern internet. I certainly don't think in Sinner's case that it's an intentional commentary about the internet, but more of a case of modern anxieties slipping into the writer's work. During the battle, Remmick tries to take down Smoke, but finds himself on the receiving end of a gunshot from a woman named Pearline. Shortly after, upstairs, he tries to go after Sammie, who literally uses his guitar to keep Remmick off of him. A clever way to bring the subtext to the forefront. However, Pearline gets him again, this time with a stake. But despite using the correct weapon this time, he still catches her and turns her with a bite to the neck. As Sammie jumps out of the club and tries to flee, Remmick pursues him, slashing him across the face in the process.
I want your stories, and I want your songs.
Fans really are getting too parasocial these days, aren't they? As Remmick tries to attack Sammie, the boy recites the Lord's Prayer, and Remmick and the vampires all begin to say the words in unison with him.
Long ago, the man who stole my father's land forced these words upon us. I hated those men, but the words still bring me comfort.
His speech feels more like he's trying to morally justify his actions. All of Remmick's promises of friendship, unity, and fellowship were only there as a mask to his true intentions. Just like the colonizers who forced their religion over his homeland, only as a means of control. But Remmick doesn't see Sammie reaching for his guitar until he strikes him across the face with it, hurting the rest of the vampires in the process. Again, the subtext is brought to the forefront here. Sammie uses his guitar, the tool of his music, and the voice of his oppression to attack. The very thing that Remmick wanted to exploit is flipped and used as a weapon. Bit by bit, Remmick's true nature bleeds through until there's nothing left behind. And that's reflected in the approach to the special effects makeup.
And the makeup, the prosthetics, it's not adding something to his face, it's taking away. So it was all about peeling back the layers of what Remmick is. So I wanted to almost excavate the vampire, that his face is being torn away. Even though makeup is an additive process, we're trying to create the illusion that it's subtractive.
As Remmick tries to attack Sammie, Smoke delivers a stake through him, this time critically striking his heart. The vampires linked to Remmick all scream in pain as the sun rises, and Remmick and his clan are burnt to dust. Despite being Sinner's primary villain, he's probably not what most would consider to be like the most evil person in the story. He is evil, don't get me wrong, but I hope listening to me dig into the context of his character for the last half hour helped unpack the nuance behind what I would consider one of the more clever villains we've seen as of late. I always tell people I'm like the worst person to ask if something was scary or not, because I watch so much horror that I often don't find anything scary. Guys, I've seen over 1,000 movies now, if you include the Baby Metal movie. I doubt too many people, especially horror fans, are having nightmares about Remmick, but I still think he's beloved because he embodies a couple things we love about art: personal expression and communicating a message by allowing the audience to see things from a new perspective. Remmick mistakes consumption for connection. He believes that by absorbing enough voices, he might restore his own culture. But what he calls fellowship, Jim Crow era jazz musicians see as erasure, because the blues aren't the blues if you don't understand why the singers are singing. In this video, I focused on analyzing the Irish side of the conflict, so if you haven't seen it, check out my video on Smoke and Stack, where I look at the twins and their connection to blues music. You'll find that video on the left. And if you love horror, make sure you assimilate yourself into the coven by subscribing to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring the death bell for all notifications, and I will see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.